It's that Reincarnated-as-a-Virus story by Kalaku Yuki and Pirota. Voiced over by CarmillaVT. Volume 1, Chapter 1. With the general release of the goddess's hands, a minuscule, insignificant speck is introduced to this woefully unprepared world. The seemingly benign spore drifts weightlessly through the air, dodging leaves and branches before ultimately landing on its first host, a humble forest mouse. Upon impact on its moist nose, the spore penetrates the mucous membranes of the poor beast. Unbeknownst to the creature, its fate has been sealed. Now inside of a suitable host, the virus does what it was programmed to do, making its way through the blood vessels before ultimately landing and piercing through the cell's protective walls. The invader ruptures its shell, releasing a parasitic RNA lysage, hijacking the nucleus. There, an invisible one-sided war takes place, as the RNA integrates itself into the sequence and fools the cell to produce viruses, and to produce more and more until ultimately, the mouse begins to flail in pain. A high-pitched squeak hopelessly cries for help. However, instead of death, a new consciousness is born. Dazed and confused, the mouse makes its way to a nearby puddle. It looks at itself in a reflection of the still water, dumbfounded at what it sees. Before it has a chance to properly comprehend its new situation, a piercing root bursts out of the soft soil. The mouse barely manages to dodge it, only for it to continue past it and make contact with something else entirely. The root wraps around the trunk of a strange three-legged bird before shoving it headfirst into its carnivorous juices. Watching this whole scene unfold, a rat begins to grasp with the now undeniable idea that he is in another world. The last thing he can remember about his previous life was the endless nights he has spent in the lab of a pharmaceutical company. But one day, after everyone had left, he continued his research, where he assumes he made some kind of mistake causing his untimely demise. But instead of the nothingness of death, he basks in the light of a great goddess who then sent him to this world. He remembers one thing, though, the goddess saying something about a virus. In other words, it's possible that he's merely controlling the rat, and not the rat itself. Although his scientific instincts tell him to reject the idea of the existence of a higher power, he can't help but feel like there's some kind of karmic justice being the body of a rat, after all those rats he sacrificed for his experiments. Despite his situation, he questions the capacity of this novel life of his. That is when he notices faint particles flowing in the air in front of his nose, and concludes that this must be the viruses that now inhabit the mouse. That said, if the particles are really but a small part of himself, he should be able to. Attempting to shift control, he focuses himself on a microbe 100 nanometers in diameter. When he opens his eyes, he finds himself to be a single virus. As he looks at his surroundings, he's surprised to find himself inside of a massive blood vessel filled with towering blood cells. However, knowing that there will be immune system cells in the vessel, the virus flees, squeezing through the gaps in this vessel walls. There, he is greeted by the large wall built entirely from animal cells, its gelatinous structure tirelessly carrying out its functions to maintain homeostasis. However, now there are mere factories built only to pump more viruses out, as our protagonist sees firsthand. Smaller versions of himself emerge from each cell, and eventually he is surrounded by countless copies of himself. Though it only seems that he possesses consciousness and a will of his own. as he tries to talk to one, only for it to float aimlessly without a single thought in between his large, dopey eyes. Out of sheer curiosity, he tries to order these mindless viruses to follow him. And to his astonishment, they do. A massive wave of round creatures close onto him, and eventually gathering into a swarm. It seems that they can be controlled to some extent. Evidently, modern common sense does not apply here, or any isekai for that matter. And not unlike other isekai, an announcement pops up, notifying him that he's acquired a set of traits: infection potency, domination, and duplication. With these abilities, he's able to integrate his host skills into his own RNA, giving him the cowardice and danger perception skills. With this new knowledge of what it means to dominate his host, he concludes that the more creatures he infects, the more traits and the more powerful he can become. With a childish glee, he races off deeper into the forest, fascinated at his ability to evolve, and with the possibility to become the most sinister being in history. Eager to experiment with his new capacities, he tries to infect a nearby plant by spitting viruses at it. And, after a moment, he manages to dominate it. He obtains the fever alleviation and pain relief skills. But before he can take advantage of these new skills, his viruses are dispersed by a sudden gust of wind and come upon the same carnivorous plant that he encountered before. He stares with bated breath at what new skills he would get from the plants. Instead, he nearly gets eaten himself, as a plant lunges at him, hoping to make a meal out of him. Apparently, he's still quite weak. But even a weak virus can have tremendous potential and could devastate a population. Smallpox, for instance, spread and took countless lives when it first began to infect humans. And if he carefully continues to increase his viral abilities, together with his knowledge as a former scientist, he can achieve complete infection of all organisms and become the very source of a world-encompassing pandemic. But before he can continue his tyrannical delusions, his danger perception kicks in. He turns to see the imposing figure of a large wolf. With the glare from the beast, his cowardice skill activates, paralyzing his cute, dainty little feet. Completely and utterly defenseless, he becomes a nice morsel to the wolf. And with this, his new life comes to a sudden end. While this is all taking place, peeking down from the heavens above, the goddess gives a small chuckle and a mischievous grin. Chapter 2: My First Battle. The memories of him working tirelessly in his lab play out in front of him. Consumed by his work, he never really connected with the other researchers. The voices of his colleagues whispering behind his back speak of a new species of virus that he is studying with a tinge of concern. But in the end, they leave him be. With this reliving of his previous life now finished, he wondered what to do now. Curling inside the wolf, he floats aimlessly, patiently waiting for the end. As if. He activates his infection traits with the full force of all the virus that was inside the mouse. To his command, the clone starts spreading and duplicating throughout the body. And when he has sensed the wolf has become fully infected, he activates his domination trait. The wolf's skills pop in one after another: enhanced smell, stamina, ferocity. Just as he notices a higher point of view, the bloody smell of the meal still in his mouth impacts his new senses. He has taken full control of his new host. To him, this is a marvelous discovery. This means that even if the host dies, he'd be able to live on in another so long as he can infect it, essentially making him immortal. Fascinated, he dashes through the trees with his new body, on the lookout for more organisms to infect, but with little success. That is when he gets a whiff of something in the air. Apparently, all the animals are hiding from him, Although this new realization of how powerful he is, he can't help but feel bored being the creature that already exists in his previous world. He'd much rather be something more interesting, like those of a true fantasy world. Just as he says that, he turns to the direction of an innocuous sound, only to see small human-shaped figures, one of which is waving a small wooden club. Their large pointed ears and abnormal skin color can only mean one thing: goblins. And although they look slightly different, they are undeniably goblins. Just as he is about to sneak in for a kill, he screeches to a halt. He hears a feminine cry in the direction of the goblins. Barely able to see through the thicket, he spots a small figure surrounded by the monsters. "Although I'm a rookie, I'm still an adventurer," she cries as she makes her final stand. It is a human. One of the goblins jumps, deliver a blow with a simple club. The girl, in response, quickly moves her blade to block. She breathes heavily with each breath. She's beginning to become more and more exhausted. That, with her lack of armor, it's likely she won't last much longer. But for our protagonist, this is the ideal situation. For if he is going to thrive in this world, he is going to need a human body. And now, here's one right for the picking. All he has to do is infect the goblin and then go for the human. So he activates the wolf's agility and ferocity skills. His body tenses up as adrenaline pumps through his veins. He bursts into a sprint, racing to the girl just as another goblin goes for another charge. He pounces at the attacking monster, seeking its flesh-tearing fangs at his thin green throat. Skill obtained: short temper. The goblin reaches for its throat in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. The girl trembles at what just transpired before her eyes. The wolf, with barely time to complain about the foul taste of the goblin's blood in its mouth, is attacked by another one of the monsters. He dodges, circling around to its vulnerable back before lunging its fangs once more. Skill obtained: night vision. The girl and the last remaining goblin stare in fear as the pain screamed erupt from the carnage. She is overwhelmed by terror, her legs failing underneath her. The other goblin, however, makes a break for it. He acts quickly, spewing an invisible cloud of tiny pathogens, getting him the dexterity ability. With the goblins taken care of, the wolf turns to the girl, who is in the middle of desperately trying to get away. As he approaches her, he gives a gentle sniff. Confused, the girl lowers her guard and begins to give the beast a timid look. Although she is both exhausted and injured, the virus just can't seem to follow through his plan to take over her body. His lack of knowledge of how advanced the medical technology of this world is causing him to hesitate. And if he is careless, he could lead to his own destruction if he is discovered at his current state. As he is contemplating this situation, the girl calls out to him. He turns and gives her a gentle woof. The girl's expression changes, wondering if this was the same beast that attacked those goblins just a moment earlier. Mistaking his actions as an effort to save her, she pounces onto him, giving him a heartful hug. He screams internally and pushes himself off her, to her disappointment. She beckons him to come and not to be afraid, but he is very afraid. Afraid of who in the world is this careless creature. Chapter 3: An Encounter and a Goal. She rambles on and on about the series of events that led her to her encounter with the goblins. All the while, the wolf sits nervously, forced only to listen to her rants. When he gives the girl a weary yawn, she notices and proceeds to apologize profusely. She then gives a simple introduction. She is the adventurer, Elena. She then again thanks the wolf for saving her life. At the very least, the virus finally learned something about this world, the presence of adventurers. She explains how she had only been an adventurer for 2 weeks, but still struggling to fight against the lowest ranked monsters, such as goblins. As the virus begins to think about using her to experiment on, she reaches a hand tenderly out to him. She brings his head close and plants a small kiss on his nose, which was far too intimate for the former Japanese man, sending him launching to the ground nearby. That was a close call. If he was in his previous world, that would have led to a shameful incident. He should really watch out for this girl, for she is truly careless. As the sun sets, she warmly mentions that she should probably head back. Just as she prepares her goodbye, the wolf gets up to her surprise. Not for any particular reason. He's just so worried for her at this point that he feels obligated to escort her home. She, of course, sees this as him just merely being a gentleman and seeing her off. As they walk through the forest, she tells of a small village that was her home. Unfortunately, it was destroyed and laid to ruin after a goblin raid. Not a house or field left unpillaged. But on the bright side, everyone managed to survive and move to new land. But she, on the other hand, had other ambitions. She left the safety of the village to become an adventurer, someone strong enough to protect everyone. The wolf listens intently to the girl's tragic backstory. As he did so, something clicked within him. Like her, he also wanted to protect people. He engrossed himself in his work, even at the cost of his relationships. This girl, however, is filled with a childish enthusiasm despite becoming an outcast. Eventually, the girl cries out to the wolf. They finally manage to make it to the edge of the forest without incident, to the place where the girl calls home. As he looks, he's bombarded by the sight of towering stone structures and the city's imposing walls. This is the city of Faust. He can't help but stare. It was much bigger and more advanced than he imagined. It looks like he was a wise choice to be cautious about infecting the girl. As much as she would want to invite him into the city, it might not be the best idea to introduce a monster into it. He agrees, and with a simple gesture, he tells the girl to go and not to worry about him. With a wide smile and wave, she gives her goodbyes to the wolf, confident that they will meet again someday. He gives her his best goodbyes he can, given his current form. And there she goes, her figure getting smaller and smaller as she walks towards the city. He can't help but feel sad at this party. After all, it has been a long time since he has spoken to anyone like that, even in his previous life. He turns his back to the city, toward the forest. She is an adventurer at the end, he thought. An adventurer? A thought suddenly strikes him. Couldn't he just become an adventurer as well? Not only will he be able to travel freely from city to city, but he'll be able to encounter and infect a variety of creatures. The perfect way to get all sorts of powerful skills. But for that, he would need a more human-shaped body. Even if he managed to dominate Elena, he wouldn't be able to mimic her behavior, which would lead to unwanted suspicion. As he walks in thought through the forest, he encounters another group of goblins. Although he does not want any more skills at the moment, his first priority to secure a more human body. Humans. Human. That's when it hit him. Humanoid monsters. He should just dominate a humanoid monster and disguise himself to enter a town. It was worth a shot, he thought. Luckily for him, one of them had already become infected. It must have been the same goblin that ran from his first encounter with them. Just as he sets out to dominate it, a thought suddenly strikes him, causing him to hesitate. How would he do that, exactly? He was able to take over the wolf when he was eaten as a mouse. And by that logic, does he need to be eaten by the goblins in order to move his consciousness to them? The idea of getting eaten again makes his stomach turn. That is when he remembers how he focused his consciousness into a singular virus. Ultimately, all the viruses are a part of him, so he should be able to move into another virus from a different body. Theoretically, at least. So he puts this plan to motion. He concentrates on the virus inside the goblin. And eventually, the transfer was a success. When he opens his new eyes, he discovers he's now in the body of a small goblin. But his victory is short-lived, as he notices the rest of the pack turning to face him. Chapter 4: The Goblin's Den. The group stare at him with menacing expressions. One of them eventually calls out to him in a loud voice, causing him to flinch. "The bag I carry," he demands. Taking the bag before he can even thank him, the larger one appears to be sympathetic to him due to his previous encounter with the wolf. Just then, a feminine-looking goblin then approaches him, handing him a leaf before telling him to eat it to calm his nerves. He can't help but notice how kind they are to him. It's actually kind of refreshing. As the group walks away, he turns back to the wolf he used to possess. It seemed to revert to its wild nature, because when it noticed him, it gave him a threatening snarl and proceeded to charge him and the group. The goblins are then set into a panic. With their short legs, the goblins stood no chance of escaping unharmed. That is when the virus thought of a plan. He spreads his pathogens into the air, affecting each and every last one of the group. He then activates stamina and agility skills in their body. With this newfound power, they manage to run and jump more than they ever have been able to before, dodging each of the wolf's strikes. They manage to escape up to a rocky ledge to safety. The group cheers at their victory over the beast, as the virus revels in this new discovery. He was able to activate his symptoms in another creature he infected. As much as the possible applications fascinate him, it appears that they arrived at the goblin's den. It was a small cave with 2 spear-wielding goblins guarding its entrance. The virus gives a salute to the guard as he passes the boundary of the mouth of the cave. That is where he is awestruck by the depressing state of the goblin tribe that inhabit it. Their thin, worn bodies make the malnourishment and lack of shelter evident. One of the goblins then explains in a broken language that there is not only a lack of food, but their leader has quite the quick temper. As they continue deeper into the cave, they eventually come upon the imposing figure of their boss. His large, muscular body towering over the child-sized monsters before him. The virus then notices that he does not look at all happy at their arrival. The group wastes no time dropping to their knees, and they proceed to take out their spoils from their bags. The hobgoblin then asks in a deep, grangly voice if this is truly all the food they managed to find. Then, the goblins try to explain that due to the orcs in the area, there is not much to scavenge for. The hobgoblin orders them to attack a human village instead. However, this is an impossible task, as one of the goblins explains. Due to the fact that the humans are strong and their weapons powerful, there would be no match for their small, weak bodies and makeshift weapons. Just then, the hobgoblin unleashes a powerful kick, sending one of the small green bodies flying towards the ground. He then proceeds to stomp him repeatedly before a voice yells out. It is the virus-infected goblin calling him out for his tyrannical behavior. Just as he chastises the leader, he sends a cloud of particles hoping to take over his large body. But an unfortunate announcement pops up just as the hobgoblin reaches toward him with an unnerving face. Virus resistance detected. Only a short time frame available to perform infection. Chapter 4: The Goblin's Nest. A resistance? He had no idea such a skill existed. A large hand reaches out for him and grabs him by the head, easily lifting him up. The hobgoblin's fingers then squeeze, painfully increasing the pressure on his head. With the pain intensifying by the second, the virus wastes no time. He begins the duplication process within the goblin, hoping to overpower his resistance with sheer numbers. And just as the pressure on his head is starting to become excruciatingly unbearable, he gets a notification. Infection successful. He looks back at the large hobgoblin, their eyes meeting before his consciousness fades. To the rest of the pack, it looks as though the hobgoblin suddenly gave up on his punishment. Worried, the other goblins call out to their boss, who then turns to face them, giving them a friendly, toothy smile. He addresses his subjects, saying that he had a sudden change of heart, and from now on, they were going to become friends. Now, in this new body of his, new skill notifications pop up in his mind. Brute strength, patience, and sharp claws. But before he can analyze them, a guard comes running into the room, panicking. Outside, it's orcs, he cries. Now thrown into the heat of war, how will he manage to lead this makeshift army to victory? After all, they aren't exactly Spartans. Just some small creatures armed with makeshift weapons and scared useless. But as their leader, he should at least act like one. And what leader would not ready his troops without a special inspiring speech? Listen, you all! The loud cries of the hobgoblin resonate through the bodies of his army. Do not be afraid! However, unbeknownst to them, as he speaks, he spreads his virus throughout the group, not leaving one uninfected. And once they are all infected, he activates the symptoms of stamina, agility, dexterity, and brute strength on each of the goblins, transforming their once feeble bodies into chiseled brutes. Their bodies grown in size and muscle, and fortunately for him, the goblins are simple creatures who don't question this newfound power. With his newly inspired army, he turns to face his opponents, eager to start this new large-scale experiment. Chapter 5: Invasion of Formidable Enemies. The two armies face each other, ready for the fight of their lives. On one side are the large pig-like orcs army, and on the other are the fierce goblin tribe. The orcs look on in confusion by the transformation of the goblins, their confidence beginning to waver. Even more skills begin to flood into the virus's mind. Those of which he've already had have been upgraded to the next rank. With this new power, the virus can't help but gloat. He taunts the orcs, asking what happened to that vigor they had a moment ago. One of the orcs falls for the taunt and then charges. Anticipating this, the virus raises a massive greatsword, easily lifting it above his head and bringing the flat side down with the full weight of the iron blade, crushing the overgrown swine and sending its fluids gushing out like squeezed fruit. The hobgoblin brandishes the bloody blade to the rest of the orcs, a grin growing on his face. He's not scared. In fact, he's getting fired up. In response, a group of orcs make their charge toward the hobgoblin, who then in turn delivers a cleaving horizontal slice, cackling as he receives more skills in the process. His goblin army makes their attacks on the weaker looking orcs, completely overpowering them. Growing irate at the sight, the orc lord tells his subordinates to release the beast they caught just yesterday. But the teeming orc tries to reason to their leader that is not ready and they will sustain substantial collateral damage if they did so. But the orc lord disregards this warning and orders again for its release. Back in the battlefield, the virus continues his rampage, cutting through the ranks of the opposing army. And just as he's starting to feel bad for the orcs, a massive strike of lightning impacts the earth from the forest edge. The virus and his army turn to face the source of the sound and see a white beast running towards them. It's the bear-like monster whose horns crackle with electricity. One of the goblins recognizes it as an electric bear. The taming orc commands it to devour the goblins, but instead, the beast leers at its so-called owner and unleashes a strike of thunder at them, leaving nothing but a charred mess. At this, the goblins become frightened and plead with their leader to order to retreat. But the virus has no intention of running, thinking to himself that there's no way in hell that he will lose to a beast. Besides, that electric-producing ability looks very tempting. He steals a spear from a nearby goblin and proceeds to cut his hand with it, covering it with his infected blood. He tosses the spear towards the beast, and although he did get some skills from it, confirming the weapon had broke skin, on impact, the spear falls apart on the monster's tough hide, failing to deliver a critical blow. All the while, the bear charges with its obsidian horns once more. The hobgoblin then embraces himself for what is to come. An electric blast is unleashed and strikes right on top of the group. The virus tries his best to keep standing, and thanks to his newly acquired lightning resistance, he manages to dampen most of the damage. However, his subordinates weren't so lucky. Now nothing but charcoal, they crumble apart under their own weight. Leaving no time to rest, the beast roars once more, causing the goblins to scatter, as one by one they are engulfed in a fiery white lightning. All the virus can do is stare as it devastates his army. In a desperate attempt to save what is left of his people, he charges the beast, tackling it away to save a pair of goblins. He can't even tell why he did it. Something so illogical, he thinks to himself, as he manages to wrestle the bear in place, holding it even as it sinks its crushing jaws onto his shoulder. With his right arm now rendered useless, he hopelessly tries to think of a way to get out alive. On closer inspection, he notices that the bear is drinking his blood, and realizes that this is his opening. He activates negative symptoms in the bear, the inflictions causing him to release him. He then activates multiple offensive traits on himself. His body morphs to become as strong and deadly as possible. With all his power, he lunges at the beast with massive claws, easily slicing through the beast's chest and all the way through to its neck. With the battle over, his exhaustion catches up to him. He passes out and hits the floor with a dull thud. After the war, the goblin village managed to recover and even thrive. With the orcs no longer in the picture, there's no longer a problem foraging for food. Life in the goblin tribe had been rather comfortable for him, so much so that he wouldn't mind staying their leader, at least for a while. But fate has other plans, as one of the goblins returned with unusual objects. It is an ominous bird-like mask. As he stares into its lifeless glass eyes, he suddenly remembers what he set out to do: to infiltrate human society.